So I remember my first day of grade 9. For weeks leading up to this day, there was anticipation as I moved from an elementary school to a high school. And I honestly had no idea what it was going to be like. I had heard stories of what it was like, some good, some bad. And I was honestly so nervous because I imagined this massive building that I wasn't used to, where I knew nobody. My surroundings were not familiar. I pictured myself getting lost on my way to my first class or being late to class because I didn't know where I was. Right? Then new grade 9s are, they're usually just full of angst and awkwardness. No offense if you're a grade 9 watching. This is just true. I was the same way. I was full of angst and awkwardness, and I'm about to go into a school where they're, the grade 10s, the 11s, the 12s, they all know people in their surroundings, but I don't. It was just not, I was just not in a good place emotionally. It took some time to adjust, and it was honestly scary. And for several weeks, I felt uncomfortable everywhere I went. I would walk the halls and everyone would look at me because I was in grade 9 and I'm the new kid, but no one really knew me, right? I had a few, grade school friends, but even then we're all new. Nobody really knew us. Honestly, the best way that I can describe how I felt on my first day of high school is like a zoo animal or a fish in a fishbowl. Like everyone watched, but no one was in there with me. You can probably relate to how I felt. Like, have you ever felt watched but unnoticed? Or people are staring at you, but you don't really feel seen? I think we've all honestly wondered that before, right? Like, does it even matter if I'm here? Does anyone care what I think? Does anyone notice what I have to say? And honestly, there are times when we feel like, we're the center of the universe, or we feel like we should be at least. If we need a ride to practice, then everyone should stop what they're doing and make it happen. Or if we're gluten-free, then the birthday cake at our friend's party should obviously be gluten-free. Or if we don't like that movie, then it shouldn't be one of the options that we watch tonight. Like, if we're honest, it's easy to feel like we're the center. But then there are times when it feels like nobody notices us at all. Maybe you look around at that friend's party, back when we could do that sort of thing, the friend who said that you just had to be there, but they haven't even said a word to you. Right? You're at the party that you just had to be at, but it feels like no one would actually notice if you slipped out the back door. Or maybe your parents won't stop bragging about your sister's grades or your brother's athletics, but you don't ever hear them telling anyone about you. When we don't feel seen or valued by people in our lives, it starts to make us feel like we don't matter. Whenever we feel like we're overlooked or ignored, it's really easy to become discouraged or feel numb and disengaged. If nobody's listening, why bother speaking, right? Like, if nobody's paying attention, then it really doesn't matter what we do, does it? When we feel like we don't matter, it honestly, it takes the passion and excitement out of life. We don't feel like we're thriving in life, we're just surviving. And nobody wants to feel that way. But it's more than that. You see, it's actually possible that we do have people in our lives telling us that we matter. Parents or grandparents or coaches, and they tell us that and they mean it, but we don't believe them. So we start thinking in our minds, well, they're our parents and they're supposed to say that, or they're my coach, and so they're just trying to get the best performance from me. And so whether we hear this message a lot or whether we never hear this message at all, believing that we matter is honestly a lot harder than it looks. But the good news is that today we're going to talk about someone who is very familiar with those same feelings that we've all experienced. And what we learn from her life can be a game changer for all of us. In this series, Afterlife, we're talking about Easter, specifically Jesus' resurrection, where he showed the world that he conquered death and that he's bigger and better than we could possibly imagine. More specifically, we're talking about people who encountered Jesus after his resurrection and had a different life after they saw him. Their afterlife, their life after they encountered the resurrected Jesus changed so much while they were still here on earth. And so today, we're going to talk about a woman named Mary and her experience with Jesus before and after the resurrection. But before we do that, let's start with a little bit of context here. The Bible is a collection of books. Some of you may know this already, but those books are divided into two parts. You've got the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is a collection of books before Jesus walked on earth. Then Jesus is born, and then you have the rest of the Bible, which is the New Testament. And in the first 4 books of the New Testament, there's accounts of Jesus' life by 4 different people. They're called the Gospels, and they talk about a handful of different women named Mary. It honestly, I don't know, must have been like the trendy name back then. You've got Mary, who was the mother of Jesus. Then when Jesus was dying on the cross, there were 2 other Marys that were mentioned as well. And one of them was named Mary Magdalene. And the truth is, there's a lot we don't know about Mary Magdalene. But one thing we know for sure is that she was a committed follower of Jesus. In fact, her name is actually mentioned more than any other woman who wasn't in Jesus' family. The Gospels mention her 12 different times. And Luke tells us that she traveled with Jesus and, helped support his ministry financially. He also mentions that Mary had 7 demons driven out of her. And that honestly sounds crazy. But back then, what that basically means is that she was an outcast before Jesus healed her. And so I think we can safely say that Mary understood what it meant to be ignored and overlooked. But here's why we're talking about Mary Magdalene today. All 4 Gospels record that Mary Magdalene was there when Jesus was put on the cross. 3 of the 4 Gospels say she was there at Jesus' burial, and all 4 say that she was the first to see Jesus resurrected. You see, oftentimes the disciples, his 12 closest followers, get a lot of credit for being Jesus' most loyal followers, but there was actually no other disciple around in the big moments of Easter as much as Mary was. And on a day where we celebrate Jesus coming back from the dead, we should pay attention to one of the people who knew him most. But she just doesn't get a lot of attention. In a lot of ways, she kind of just lived life on the sidelines. Like, if you don't pay attention to what you're reading, it just honestly just sounds like a bunch of women named Mary. Nobody can keep track of which one's which and who they are and so on and so forth. It's confusing. But you don't get the sense that Mary Magdalene was a major player in the story. But she was. You see, the Gospel of John records that while it was still dark, Mary got up and went to Jesus' tomb. But when she got there, the stone that had been placed in front of the tomb was actually gone. And Mary, in this moment didn't immediately think, well, of course he's gone. Jesus is alive. She actually assumed that someone messed with the grave and took his body. And she went straight to Peter and another disciple to tell them, and they ran to the tomb, and sure enough, Mary was right. The stone was gone. The body was gone. All that was left was Jesus' grave clothes. And the other disciples left to go tell the others. But Mary stayed where she was, right by the tomb. Honestly, as if the sadness of losing a friend wasn't enough, now there was the added trauma of his body being taken or moved. And so this is where she's at. And John writes this in John chapter 20, verse 11 to 19. It says this. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw 2 angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. And he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And so Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. And so on the day that Jesus defeats death, proving God's love is bigger and stronger than anything else, he makes sure that Mary was there to see it. And this was a big deal because in the first century, when Jesus lived, a woman was actually not seen as a reliable witness. She couldn't testify in court. Her word was not to be trusted over a man's. This is just the way culture was back then. And yet, over and over again in the Gospels, at the cross, at the tomb, and on Easter morning, it was a woman who saw Jesus first, who recognized him, and who was given the job of telling the others. You see, when the rest of the world saw women as unreliable and inferior and untrustworthy, Jesus saw something different. He valued and elevated them even when the rest of the world didn't. Jesus made the decision to trust Mary with his resurrection. He knew Mary and called her by name. He chose her to be the first person to share the good news. And while others made assumptions about Mary because of her gender or her past or anything else that would have written her out of the story, Jesus wrote her in as a main character. Right? Jesus made sure that Mary knew she had value and that her word could be trusted. When the world was sending Mary one message, Jesus sent another. And if Mary wondered who she could believe, the resurrection of Jesus gave him all the credibility in the world. And so no matter what messages others may have been giving Mary, no matter what messages we may be getting, because of the resurrection, we can take what Jesus says seriously. Because of the resurrection, Mary knew that she mattered. At Easter, we celebrate something that happened 2,000 years ago, a day that changed the world. But on the very first Easter morning, it changed the lives of the people who knew Jesus best, most of all. Because now everything Jesus had said meant more than it did before. Easter morning, Jesus coming back from the dead proved that Jesus was who he said he was and that his words mattered. That morning, he spoke words that tell all of us about Mary's value and worth. In a culture where Mary would have heard again and again that she wasn't enough or she didn't have credibility and that she should stay on the edges where she belonged, Jesus made sure the message she got from him was different. And the exact same thing is true for you and me. See, just like Mary mattered to Jesus, so do you. When he said her name, he said your name too. He said the name of people who feel overlooked and unseen or forgotten. He said the name of people who feel like our part in the story doesn't matter. Because of Easter, because of the resurrection, Mary knew that what Jesus said could be taken seriously. See, she had experienced Jesus' words firsthand and what he did firsthand, and then she passed on the good news to the rest of the disciples. We're actually here today celebrating Jesus coming back to life because Mary is the one that carried the message back to Jesus' followers. And so this is the message that I want you to take with you today. You are seen, known, you are loved, and you are important. Jesus says that about you. And if we wonder if we can take the words of Jesus seriously, Easter is a reminder that we can. See, he defeated death. We can trust what he says. And Jesus says that Mary mattered. Jesus says that you matter. And the person next to you matters. When we live like that's true, our lives look completely different. And the lives of people we know and interact with look different too. I want you to think about how you treat yourself and others right now. Ask yourself some questions here. Do you believe that you matter? Do you treat yourself like you matter? Do you allow other people to treat you as if you don't matter? Do you treat others as if they matter? Are there people you treat like they matter more? Are there people you treat like they don't matter at all? Or how about this? What would it look like to start treating yourself and others like Jesus did, like they matter, starting today? You see, what would change in your life if you really believe that you matter to God, and because of that, the people around you matter as well? Would you be more confident? Would you be more intentional in your relationships? Would you care less about what people say about you? This week, I want you to think about what could change in your life if you really believed that you matter to God. You see, because of the resurrection, Mary knew that she mattered, and her life after that looked different. But please do not forget this. Because of the resurrection, you can know that you matter too.